Well, welcome to The Perspective. I'm Lorie Hartshorn and delighted to be with you this week. And thanks for joining us today. We have a great guest today. It's Joel Sherbino. Now, you might think, Sherbino, I know that name. This is Mike's nephew. I'm telling you, the Sherbinos are everywhere. That's what I'm discovering. Joel is a Canadian pastor and he pastors at Paris Presbyterian Church, but he spent actually years in ministry in Malawi. And today he joins us to share some of his experiences both internationally and in Canada, and what he sees God doing. Welcome to The Perspective, Joel. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you, Laura. I really appreciate you making some time for me today.
Well, I tell you, these Sherbinos are everywhere. I was just in the East Coast and I met another one. So I'm just feel like I'm meeting the family coast to coast. There's a lot of you, right?
There's a few of us. Yeah, you might need a little bit of a break after this one.
Well, it's an honor to meet you, Joel. And I'd just like to hear more of your story. Like what led you into full-time ministry and how long have you been serving as a pastor?
Yeah, I think I always kind of had a heart for the local church, and so I've been serving in ministry for about 20 years. 17 of those have been um, here in Canada, working in a congregation, and the other 4 years have been working in prison ministry in Malawi. And so it's always amazing how, for me, really getting into ministry was not only God opening doors, but also God closing doors. I had a certain path in mind, and that didn't quite work out, and so I began to see like where is God leading me, and it led me first overseas, and then back to Canada again, working here in a church.
I think you just hit on something so critical there. We sometimes do have our own idea, right? We want to serve God, but we think it's going to look a certain way. So tell me about what door opened in Malawi? Because you were in Malawi, where I understand
Yes,
you
that's correct.
pastored a church there, right? With what, 10,000 people? And you were also overhauling the prison system. So tell us what happened there. How did you get there and what happened there?
Yeah, really. I mean, when I was recently married, 23 years ago, and my wife's background is in development, and so we started looking at like where could we both serve, and we really started to see opportunities to begin serving overseas, and so we ended up being placed by our national church, and so my wife started working more the development side of what our church was doing, and then I was placed in a very large church as the associate pastor. And then it was out of that congregation that I got to begin to be involved in prison ministry, of which I am still a part of today.
So, okay, I feel like we have a crossover story here. My daughter-in-law went to Malawi. She was finishing her international development degree, and God transformed their life there, put a fire in their belly for church planting. And what did God do to you in Malawi? And it was through prison ministry that He really changed you, didn't He?
It really was. I mean, I've had no experience prior to my time in Malawi in prisons, working in prisons. And it was really through an opportunity where our church was involved very loosely with a prison that was fairly close by. And so one day I asked for an opportunity to go. And I remember going, spending time with the men in the prison. And at the end of my time with them, they came and said, "You're the first pastor that we've had in this prison in about 3 years." And that just kind of broke my heart. And so I said, "Listen, like, what is it that I can do? How can I help you?" And amazingly, about 3 days later, one of the prison guards brought a note to my office at the church from the inmates asking me to come and just spend time teaching the Bible to them. And so that really started the journey all the way back many years ago to where we are today.
What did you learn from your time? Yeah, from even the inmates that were in prison. What did you
Uh,
learn from that?
I think one of the biggest lessons that I've learned from them, but also that I translate in my own ministry, is just the importance of being present with people. In Malawi, there are many challenges, many difficulties. I mean, the prisons in Malawi are overcrowded and underfunded. The conditions are awful. But when it came time to ask them what they needed most, is like, we don't want to be forgotten. They feel as if they've been forgotten by their country. The families have forgotten them, and then they draw the conclusion that God has forgotten them. And I realize that in many ways, if you want to connect with people in prisons, in your own community, you have to first be present with them and know that they are cared by you. And so that has really been the mantle of our ministry in prisons, but also something that I try to translate into our local congregation as well, is that if people don't know that they're cared by you, cared for you, they're not going to listen to what you have to say next.
Well, it's so true. I used to work for a guy named John Maxwell, and he used to always
Okay.
say, "People don't care how much you know till they know
Yeah,
how much you care." And I think that is so profound. No matter where you are in life, you don't have to be a full-time pastor to actually get that. Right, Joel? Like, this is something that
absolutely.
actually should be the heart and motivation of every follower of Christ. Are you involved in prison ministry here in Canada? Then you came back here 20 years ago, and are you still
Yeah,
involved?
yeah. So I'm still, so when I came back to Canada after spending 3 years in Malawi, I started a local church. And while we're in Malawi, we have two adopted children. And so they were about 2 years old, 2 and 1 year when we moved back to Canada. And we always had the plan to go back to Malawi. And so we did when they were much older. Back in 2015, we returned. And that's when I got re-engaged with the prison ministry. And so I left the church in Paris, Ontario, where I'm serving, went back for a year and served primarily in the prisons again. And it's really there that I was kind of given a new vision to be involved. And so when I returned back to Canada after a year, I presented my church an opportunity to say, how could I be involved both as a pastor in Canada, but also in overseeing the prison ministry in Malawi? And so at that time, we were involved with about 4 prisons. We had a group of about 3 volunteers. And so I started spending my time. And so now the ministry's growing to where we're involved in 24 prisons. We have a paid staff of 5 Malawians who oversee the ministry in the country. And I go back and forth more as a kind of an oversight in terms of all that's happening. So it's been amazing to see how we've incorporated the prison ministry into what our local church is doing as well. And so I kind of wear two hats. I love the prison ministry, but I also love being a pastor in my local community.
I just love that, Joel. That isn't that amazing how God sowed a seed in your life those many years ago? And seeds are meant to grow and they're meant to
Yeah,
multiply. And that's the way the kingdom works. And when one person just simply obeys God, look at years later, the multiplication effect of that. I know that in Malawi and even in my son and daughter-in-law's experience, they learned so much from the people there. They have a
yeah.
multiplication mindset. They're not just about everybody grow their own thing, but they very much network and work together. Have you found that to be true? And what lessons can we learn in North America from those and our brothers and sisters in Malawi?
I think one of the greatest lessons I learned from the people in Malawi is the importance of taking steps of faith. I mean, they truly live by faith, in their own lives, in their own ministries, and this ministry really grew because of the faith of the people that I was working with in Malawi. I remember the time when we were visiting 4 prisons, they wanted to expand and they wanted to go and visit and be involved in even more prisons, and I was hesitant, I was reticent. I was like, I'm not sure we have the funding for this. I'm not sure we have the model for this." And I remember one of my key volunteers at the time, who's still with us, looked me in the eye and he has this amazing smile. And he says, "Joel, why don't we try and just see what God's going to do?" And uh, that's really been our approach. And so they take steps of faith and they really build this sense of community and trust with one another. And so uh, I think the two most important lessons I've learned from my time in Malawi is the importance of taking steps of faith, not just talking about faith, and then the importance of community, of realizing that when you do it, you don't do it alone, that you find people to take the step of faith with you. And that just encourages you when you come up against some of the more challenging times.
I love that so much. I think that's so true in the times that I've spent internationally working with different ministries. First of all, you don't have to teach them what community means. They
Yeah.
live dependent on one another. And it's so true that we in North America want to figure everything out before we step out in faith. But actually, that's not really what faith is about. It's stepping out before we even know or have everything figured
Yep.
out. I think that's a good word. We're going to come right back, Joel. Thank you for sharing that. We're going to find out a little more of what you're doing in Canada. And God's got good things going on in Canada. We have our challenges too, but stay in tune here. We'll be right back with Joel.
What does it mean to redeem? It means to take something bad and make it things that were meant for evil. God turned it around for my good.
Well, we're back. Joel, as I was listening to you talk about faith and just how our brothers and sisters in Malawi, they really get it. You have one foot sort of in ministry there, one foot in Canada. Do you find that this keeps you challenged and kind of on the front edges of living in faith?
I think it does. I think it provides a great variety, and I think I also see just a real wonderful blending of ministry. I know my church is praying for the ministry in Malawi, also supporting it financially, but also my team in Malawi are aware of what we're doing as a church and are praying for us as well. And so I really find it just super helpful for me in terms of how I engage with both, in terms of just the variety of ministry and the opportunities to step out in faith.
I think it's really great. I think we all need to be shaken up somehow and get out of our North American mindset. So speaking of North American mindset, as a pastor in Canada, what are the strengths and the challenges facing the local church here?
I think in many ways, one of the greatest strengths, but also can be one of the challenges is just what is our posture in terms of the communities that we're ministering to? I think one of the strengths is when um, communities get to hear the message of Jesus, but they also see it lived out in the lives of people. And so there's been kind of a growing movement of churches that talking about more about what they are for, as opposed to what it is they're against. I mean, we think of the message that came at Christmas when the angel declared, "We bring you good news of great joy for all people." And I think that's really where we need to start. I think that's where the strength begins. Again, relating back to my time in prisons, is that people aren't going to be open to what you have to say until they see how do you live? How do you interact? And do they see the evidence of what you believe actually being lived out in your own life?
Oh, that's such a good word. Like, what are we actually for? Not just all what we're against, because that is not a way to draw people to Jesus. And he certainly didn't operate that way. He took his time and he cared about people that were around him and he noticed people. And if we always, on our march and have our issues, I think it's
Yeah.
disenfranchising, right, to the world. The world, we've all gone through this thing called the pandemic. And,
Yeah.
it's affected everything around us. What do you think how has the effect been on the church? We've seen a decline in church attendance. Are you seeing anything change there?
I think in many ways the impact of COVID has just kind of accelerated and amplified, I think, some of the realities of things that were already happening. Churches that were in slow decline, it just rapidly increased. But I also think churches that were in a growing and were trying new initiatives realized that there were opportunities to kind of step out. And so what we're noticing in our own church is that like our attendance is higher now than it was pre-COVID, in terms of people coming back, new people coming. And I think what is most exciting is people coming who have little to no faith background whatsoever. So it's not just people from other churches who have been frustrated and have left and have come. They're literally walking through the doors and are just wondering and wanting to know like what is life all about? And so I think there are challenges there that COVID has presented, but I also think it's opened up some incredible opportunities.
I think you're so right. I mean, our experience where I'm at church east of Toronto, we're just seeing a whole new drawing of people but
Mhm.
into church maybe for the first time or they have some church history, they're coming back, but I think it's an opportunity for us to lean into God doing a new thing. Um, as you see churches, even your own experience, but just I'm sure your network with pastors across Canada, are you finding that churches are maybe paying more attention to the community they're serving than perhaps they did before?
I think so. I think churches that are growing, I think churches that are um, impacting their community are realizing that churches have to be not just simply in a community, but have to be for their community. And so that means running programs outside of their building, using their building to benefit the community. Just continue looking for opportunities to reach out. One of the things that in my conversation around so many other people involved in growing churches is just how do you create more of a culture of invitation, but also hospitality.
Mm.
And so even if people don't believe, they still feel that they can belong and can become a part of it. And so it's really getting outside of the walls of the church and getting into where your community is at.
I totally agree with you. I mean, when you look at the gospel and the Great Commission himself, we're told to go. And going off, it is to go to people and to bring the hospitality, to bring the gospel itself. But people want to know that they belong. And often they won't align their beliefs with something unless they feel a sense of belonging. So I think there's a real call to even personal evangelism, both in word and deed. Do you find a movement of evangelism really happening around you?
Yeah, I think that's one of the I'm sure not everyone in our church would kinda use that word, but just
Right.
just the idea of becoming more invitational and realizing that faith is personal, but it's not meant to be private. But how we share our faith is not in the way of, being over the top or being obnoxious, but if we truly believe this is good news and that this is for all people, then then why are we not talking about it? Why are we not demonstrating it? And I think one of the things we've been talking about a lot is not being apologetic around what it is that we believe, but really being authentic in terms of how we live. I mean, one image I often use with people in our church is I say, listen, people are window shopping for hope, and they're trying to find it, and we never know in what way it's going to happen, and so people are often wanting to connect with you and see how you're living, how you're interacting, and that's going to open up a level of curiosity that then they're going to start asking questions, and then it's a natural conversation because you've lived in a way that has truly been authentic to what it is that we believe in Jesus.
Oh, that is right on. I totally agree with that. It frees you up too, doesn't it? Um, Final
Yeah,
word,
it really
Joel. What
does.
encouragement would you offer maybe to those watching today? They're struggling a little bit with their church experience or maybe feeling disconnected from church altogether. What would you say to them?
Yeah, I think one of the beautiful things about church is that, it's not the perfect place. I mean, I think it's individuals that are coming together and are wanting to find community, wanting to find a sense of hope. And so I know that I have had many conversations with people who have been hurt, who have been burned, who have kind of stepped away. And I would just encourage people to kind of take that step again. I mean, a step of faith. It's not always just simply in terms of everything that you're doing, but it's often in the little things. And so I just encourage people to step back into a community that is authentic, a community that is open, and a community that really talks about being wanting to be for you. And so I know it's not always easy. It sometimes can be intimidating, but just take that step of faith and really trust what God is going to do in their midst.
That's really good, Joel. Well, God bless you in your work in
Thank you.
Paris, Ontario, and your work in Malawi. I love how God is continue to write your story, and thank you for that encouragement too. The church is God's idea, and people aren't perfect, but God is present in the church. So that call to show up again, right? That's a good word.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for
Thanks, Laura. I
joining.
really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for joining us. We'll be right back.
Hi, my name is Alan Gallant, and I'm the Executive Director of Agora Network Ministries, a ministry that wants to resource you as a believer in Jesus and resource the church. So we provide an academy, we provide seminars, and we provide conferences for you to get help for your own mental health and for your church. So if you want to reach out to us, go to our website, agoranetworkministries.com, for help.
There's a story in the Bible written for those of us who don't have it all together. For some, admitting any need is difficult because, well, we're too invested in having it all together, or at least looking like we have it all together. Vulnerability doesn't feel like an option, right? What would people think of us? But Jesus says that vulnerability is a requirement of faith, and God loves faith. In Luke chapter 8, verses 41 to 56, we meet three characters who each find themselves in a desperate, vulnerable situation, and they don't have it all together. They come to Jesus just as they are, vulnerable, desperate, willing to risk being exposed or embarrassed in front of a huge crowd. First, we meet Jairus. He's a local synagogue leader who comes to Jesus with a heart full of desperation. His 12-year-old daughter is dying, and in a moment of complete vulnerability, he falls at Jesus' feet and he pleads for help. And instead of sending someone else, as leaders often do, he runs to Jesus himself, laying down his pride and his status to ask for the one thing he can't control, his daughter's life. His love for her has left him utterly vulnerable. Well, then there's the little girl. We can easily forget about her, but she's only 12 years old and she's dying. She too is utterly vulnerable, but there's nothing she can do about it. She's entirely dependent on others and powerless in her situation. Well, in verses 43 to 44, we meet yet another woman in desperate need. The passage says, a woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding, and she could find no cure. Coming up behind Jesus, the scripture says, she touched the fringe of his robe. This woman is nearly the opposite of Jairus. She's got no social standing, no advocate to speak on her behalf. And for 12 years, she's been dealing with a condition that has isolated her from the community. She's been pushed to the margins, living on the fringes, yet desperate. She knows she has nothing left, so she risks it all, pressing through the crowd to touch the hem of Jesus' cloak. Well, Jesus, he heals the woman. And he goes to Jairus' house where he raises the little girl from the dead. Each miracle happens with just a touch. But each person who receives healing comes to Jesus just as they are, vulnerable, desperate, and in need. So which one do you identify with? Are you the leader, perhaps, who finds that all the usual advantages and experiences have left you with nothing? Or maybe you're like the woman, worn down by years of struggle, and you're unsure how much more you can take. Or perhaps you're like that little girl, feeling helpless and utterly dependent on others. Whatever your situation, Jesus says, come as you are. When you come to Jesus, just as we are, when we're broken, when we're weary, when we're desperate for his help, that's an act of faith. It's a declaration that we don't have to have it all together. We simply need to say, here I am. Just as I am, I need a touch from you. And that's exactly what Jesus responds to. In the midst of a crowd of people who may find Jesus interesting or even feel proud to be associated with him, Jesus stops for the one who comes with no pretense, with no need to impress. So you don't have to have it all together. In fact, please don't, because if you try to, you may miss out on an encounter with Jesus that will change your life forever. Come to Jesus just as you are, with all your vulnerability, with your brokenness, with your pain, with your sickness, with your sorrow, and let him meet you right there because he promises to meet you.
Hi, my name is Ryan Walter, and I played a long time in the National Hockey League. So long ago, I played against the Philadelphia Flyers back in the day when they were the Broad Street Bullies. Let's talk about fear. We had some fear. You couldn't be alive and not be afraid in that situation. But you know what's interesting is Napoleon says there's two great levers to move men, fear and interest. But you know what Jesus says? This is crazy. He says, fear not, right? 365 times in the Bible, apparently, it says, fear not. So this week, let's not fear. Let's believe in Jesus.
Well, what a privilege to talk with Joel today, to hear his story. And it really struck me how he talked about, and it's so true because my son and daughter in law were in Malawi. They know how to live by faith. And that's because they're vulnerable. They don't have all the answers or resources that I think we have, but they actually are open to just coming to Jesus and saying yes, even without having it figured out. And I really think that's a word for someone watching today. I know that's what God spoke to me about. You don't have to have it all together. In fact, Jesus loves it when we come to him with even our hopes and our dreams and we're willing to step out in faith and risk it all. He loves that, and I can tell you, he's there on the other side of that faith every single time. It'll blow your mind what he'll do for you. So if that was for you today, what are you waiting for? Just step into what God has put on your heart, what he's asking of you. Could be something simple or maybe something grandiose. If you need prayer, would you call us 24 hours, 7 days a week? Our prayer line's available. It's 1-855-910-6297. You can call and pray with us, and we'd love to pray for you. And Mike provides a great resource, a monthly devotional that will really encourage you every day. If you'd like that, you can email us at prayer@theperspective.tv, or you can go on the perspective.tv website and you can sign up right there. I just want to pause a moment and pray for you as you listen today. Lord, I just pray for those who are listening that you're prompting them right now in their spirit to come to you, to be vulnerable, to bring their brokenness, to bring their very selves to you, that you're right there for them. And if it's a step of faith that they're waiting on or holding back, would you just nudge them to step out and remind them that you'll be with them. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks for watching today. See you tomorrow.